So I'm going to talk a little bit about background in the process to date to get to where we are for those in the room that aren't familiar with our coastal strategy process. The fact that we're seeking feedback from the public on our draft strategy, give you a little bit of an overview of what's in the strategy itself. I think I'm going to go through that pretty quick in terms of talking about some of the detail. I'll put it up there and we can dwell on it a little bit, but I know time-wise. And then talk about next steps. So in terms of our background and process to date, so back in 2008, we didn't just come up and say, okay, we're going to develop a coastal strategy. We actually had a bit of work done beforehand where we adopted a provincial coastal management framework, which really defined our provincial approach to coastal management and established six priority coastal issues, which I'll talk about in a little bit. This framework also called for the development of a provincial, at the time it was called the Sustainable Coastal Development Strategy. So to develop this strategy, the first thing we wanted to do was make sure we knew where we were starting from. So we developed State of the Nova Scotia's Coast Report, which probably many of you in the room are aware of or have even read part of all 360-something pages. But we did develop some fact sheets and a summary report, and it really focused in on, well, what's the state of our these priority issues which we identified, like coastal development, public access, water quality. I'll talk about them a little bit more. We then used that report as the sort of the foundation for then going out and talking with the public on the state of the coast. And I have a few copies of the What We Heard report, which I'll be talking about. So maybe start on this end and just pass them around. I only brought a few. And so we went out and we conducted a series of open houses around the province. We talked with different municipalities. We held a phone survey. What else did we do? We held some multi-stakeholder workshops. So we pulled all this information together into this report called What We Heard. And it's a pretty, I'd say, objective analysis of what we heard. We didn't put any spin on it. We just reported right back what we heard from the public in terms of what they identified as their priorities within our provincially identified priorities. And you can find all this information if you go to our website, gov.ns.ca/coast. All this information is available, all the different reports and fact sheets, as well as some summary of the people who submitted feedback.
Or you can go to COINAtlantic.ca and there's a link to the...
That's true. Yeah, we're linked right on there. So based on this feedback that we got from the public and working across all the departments, we drafted our coastal strategy. And some things I want to highlight is that it's really about coordinating action on the different priority issues. The emphasis on it's a whole of government corporate approach. It's not just fisheries and aquaculture. It's not just Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. It's a whole of government approach. Like most strategies, it's building on, well, what are we already doing now that's working well? What are the programs and funding that we have in place? So building on that. And trying to develop a strategy that's scalable based on priorities and resources. Recognizing that priorities may change over the next 10 years, which is the life of the strategy, as well as resource and funding levels. And the other thing to emphasize is that really try to line up with the other strategies that have recently been released in Nova Scotia. There's a lot: the water strategy, natural resources strategy, jobs here strategy, as well as the climate change action plan. You'll see when I start to get into the strategy a little bit, you'll see some of those elements in there. The other key thing is that the strategy is really aligned around those priority issues. So the 6 priority issues that we had originally identified as a government, plus when we went out and talked to the public and stakeholders, they identified governance as another key priority issue for us to focus on in coastal management. But the strategy itself is basically aligned around goal, a series of objectives, and then a series of actions for each of those priority issues. And so I'm going to get into it right now, just providing a quick overview of what's in the strategy and down into this. So I'm going to go over it pretty quickly, but feel free at any point if you have any questions just to jump in and ask questions. So our goal for coastal development that accommodates natural coastal processes, looking at for our objectives to build and maintain buildings and infrastructure in places and in ways that minimize impacts to the natural coastline, and manage provincially regulated activities to minimize our impacts to and from the coast. Okay, so pretty high level. And then if you look at some of the actions that we're looking to undertake, establish coastal development standards. That's a big one that we've heard a lot from a lot of people about, and the need to do that. Working with municipalities to put in place municipal planning strategies in coastal areas. Working to incorporate up-to-date knowledge about coastal processes in our provincial policies, so that's of direct relevance to this group. And increasing awareness and knowledge about coastal landscapes, processes, and resources. And again, I think that's also relevant to COIN and ACZISC. Working waterfronts. Really an emphasis from a provincial perspective on making sure that those working waterfronts are safe, efficient, and support a mix of different industrial and community uses. Recognizing that working waterfronts are so important to the province, although we don't have a direct mandate for a lot of these resources, we do play a role in terms of looking at the objectives to increase the ability for local communities to manage and use those working waterfronts, and maintaining and enhancing that industrial access. In some other jurisdictions we see that access or those industrial working waterfronts being gentrified or turned into uses other than commercial access. In terms of actions, a bit more general in nature, but looking at working with the different partners, municipalities, small craft harbors, industry to identify priority needs and then developing tools and resources to address those needs. And looking at adapting and adopting successful models from other jurisdictions. For example, the state of Maine has some great programs in working waterfronts and in other regions around the country. Public access was a very big issue for the public, as many people around the table would attest. Everyone seems to have a story about a place they used to walk or they used to visit with their family or their friends they're no longer able to. So it's a big issue for Nova Scotians, and really it's just to maintain and improve access to the coast. So looking at increasing the number or the quantity of public access, but also the quality. So people use the coast for different reasons and making sure the access is available for different users. So one of the key things right off the top is creating an inventory of existing public access points. Increasing public education awareness about access that already exists, working within our Crown lands and provincially to protect and enhance our access through Crown land, and removing barriers, and I mean that not in a literal sense, but more in a figurative, removing barriers and creating incentives for private landowners to allow public access. So other jurisdictions use things like tax incentives or looking at issues around liability of people getting hurt if you allow them to cross your land. Sea level rise and storm events, really just focusing on people and property, keeping them safe from coastal hazards like erosion, storm surges, flooding. And again, this objective is very similar to an earlier one, coastal development, just making sure that buildings and infrastructure are built and maintained in a way that minimizes impacts from coastal hazards. And the real focus on preparing communities for storm-related emergencies. And so some of the actions, again, some repeats from the earlier ones in terms of establishing coastal development standards, working with municipalities, also looking at working to assess vulnerability in coastal communities. Again, some looking at provincial policies, how can we change the way that we do business to be better prepared and adapt, and looking at emergency management planning and working with property owners about steps they can take to protect themselves. Coastal ecosystems and habitats, we really looked at focusing on the conservation of sensitive coastal areas and some higher level objectives there as well, sustaining natural coastal landscapes, processes and preventing biodiversity loss, working to coordinate marine and land-based conservation efforts. That work is starting to get underway now, but in the past they've been quite separate. And looking to focus our existing and new restoration efforts on priority coastal areas. And some of the actions, looking at continuing and strengthening our mapping of coastal ecosystems, looking to prioritize coastal areas for conservation and restoration. Again, those establishing the coastal development standards run throughout this strategy is a really key action. Looking to protect more coastal lands, reviewing and possibly amending key legislation such as the Beaches Act, working in partnership with the federal government more closely on marine conservation planning or MPAs. And again, coordinating and strengthening. We have a lot of restoration programs underway in the province. It's looking at ways that we can coordinate those and strengthen them. And coastal water quality. Really, we're looking at coastal water quality that's clean for swimming and fishing and harvesting of fish. Really two clear objectives: that water's clean, so where people want to go swimming, water's clean, safe for them to do so, and improving water quality in areas where marine harvesting takes place. So I think the shellfish harvesting is a really key area there. And here are some of the actions. Again, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it's a key one is establishing our water quality standards and thresholds. There are already some in place at a national level, but it's looking at adopting those at a provincial level. And really working to focus in on some key areas where we know if with some concerted effort across government, with other levels of government, we can make a difference in water quality and possibly open up areas that are closed for either swimming or really fishing, shell fishing. And the last one, and this one I want to spend a little bit of time on, it's a bit higher level, it's the issue of governance. When we went out to do our public consultation, we thought that all of the issues we're talking about involve governance to some degree. I mean, management incorporates governance and deals, but you know what? We kept hearing over and over again from community groups, municipalities, that they wanted to see governance as its own priority. And so it's, the goal is quite high level, that we're working together to better manage our coast. But when you start getting into the objectives, it gets a little bit more clear in terms of improving public awareness about our coast, sharing information better, again, of direct relevance to this group. We see COIN and ACZISC as continuing to play a big role for us. That's why we continue to fund it so clearly over the past few years. And really increasing cooperation among levels of government, where we've gotten better at, I would say, in the past 5 years, but we still have a long way to go. Some of the key actions. This is a big one up top, is creating a lead body for coastal management within the government of Nova Scotia. Now, before folks start thinking, well, okay, here's a whole new department, we're not saying that. We're saying there needs to be a lead body. Right now we have a lead body, Fisheries and Aquaculture, through the Provincial Oceans Network. Whether that stays the same or it goes to the extreme of a new department, that's what we're looking for feedback from folks on in this draft strategy. Really working again to clarify roles and responsibilities of governments and coastal management. Even though we keep saying that over and over again, one of the clear things we heard from the public is it's still really confusing. When I have an issue that I need to deal with in my community, knowing who to talk to, where to go for information is really still confusing for a lot of people. Again, two things you've seen throughout, a really key piece is those development standards piece of working more closely with municipalities on planning in coastal areas. Looking at ways to do a better job about engagement with the public in implementation of the coastal strategy. We know across government that that's a priority and something that we are certainly interested in working to improve. Another area, we're quite involved with a number of integrated coastal planning initiatives around the province and in the region, and we want to strengthen that and looking at ways that we can increase our capacity to do so. Doing a better job, I think, about developing education awareness initiatives around the different coastal issues specific to helping us achieve our objectives. Continue to support research, community development, stewardship projects. Again, there's a lot going on, and I think it's looking at ways that we can maximize that across the different provincial departments anyway, as well as other levels of government where those opportunities exist. And a big one for this group as well is improving online access to coastal information and mapping, not just internal to government, but again, emphasizing access from a public perspective. And then identifying, a reportability or accountability mechanism in terms of the minister reporting out on an annual basis on the status of implementation of the strategy.